Hi, I'm Oliver Lundy and I'm here at this awesome new studio space with Ultra Finish, and we're going to do some light painting photography. I'm going to tell you all about how to do it in an environment like this where you can turn off all the lights and black it all out, or outside where it's completely dark and you'll get some shots that look like this. So light painting, so there's two types. You've got light painting where you pass a light through an image on a long exposure and you're looking to light up the subject of your photo. Now in this case obviously we're going to be doing cars, but you could be doing this with any type of product. You can do it inside with anything, but for this we're doing cars. So the first type is where you're lighting it up, but you're not intending on leaving an actual visible light trail in your image. And then the second type is where you're going to be shaping the light to create a shape of light in your final image. So I'm going to put up some ones now of light painted shots where there is no light trail in the image. And then I'm going to put up ones now with the light trail in the image. So hopefully that makes sense. For the purposes of today, we're going to be mainly using the light painting to light up the darker parts of the frame and to get a nice even exposure over the whole car, even though we've got this kind of ambient setup here where we might use the lighting that's already here to create the actual background, and then we're going to use light painting to light up the rest of the car where it's needed and create a few different looks. Okay guys, so the cars today I'm going to be shooting are an Audi R8 in an awesome blue colour and a classic Aston Martin DBS in black. Now the challenge with black cars is that you've got an all black environment and a black car. So what we're really looking to do is pick out the car with highlights and show the body lines with the highlights of the car, and then with the Audi there's a nice blue colour that's really going to pop against this black environment, and we're going to be able to show that colour really nicely. So as you can see, the lighting in here is awesome, and it's been a purpose-built space specifically for automotive photography, but could be used for all sorts of other photography, as with all the lights out it's just a blank black space, and it's got black floors as you can see. We've got this awesome sort of tunnel setup with this LED lighting across the top, and you've got a back wall, spotlight wall, which is really bright too, and then you've got some hexagonal lights in the ceiling and everything as well. So a couple of quick tips on how to actually use the light and what you're going to need to do. So generally speaking with this, you're talking about long exposures. I tend to use about 10 seconds. I tend to use f8 or thereabouts to make sure everything's sharp, and you're looking at ISO 100, 200, depends on how bright your light is. Now this is just a light wand from Young-New. It's got a nice bright light on it if you want it, and you can change the colours and so on. It's not an expensive light, and I've just got it attached to a monopod. Now this is so that when you're doing light paints down the length of a car, you can actually hold the light up above the car, effectively creating what would be an overhead light, and you can also get it nice and low, and you can create big shapes with it if you like. But if you want to just take it off the monopod and then use it like a more handheld light, that's fine as well. You can even use your phone if you want. Now the actual method is you want to get your camera on a tripod because it can't shake or move during the shot, otherwise it'll be blurry, and then you're going to want to set a timer, normally 10 seconds, so that you can get into position before the exposure starts, and you've got a warning with the flashing light on the front of the camera, and then you know once your exposure starts you then move through the frame trying to get an even exposure over the whole car. Now another top tip here is always overshoot. So make sure that you get enough images so that when you get back to the computer, which I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you the full edit, you've got more options than you actually need, in that you're going to want a base exposure, which is just the background or a dark frame, and then you're going to slowly build up light around the car, making sure that you've hit every panel, making sure that you've got the details of the wheels and the roof line and the mirrors and every part of the car that you want to be lit up in the photo. You need to make sure you've hit that with the light and that you're happy with the highlight. Now another top tip is that these lights will create a nice highlight on the car, but sometimes that highlight can be a weird shape if you move the light in a strange way. So you want to make sure that once you've taken your image, you go back, zoom in and make sure that the highlight follows the line of the car if you can, or just that it's a pleasing looking highlight. And if it's not, then what you can do is you can either dull the light down, so make it less bright, or you can just change the angle that you're passing it by to try and change where that highlight rolls around that part of the car. But generally, as long as you take lots of different options, you get an above frame, so you go nice and high, and you cover the whole car from above, and you make sure you get the wheels, and you get a few side passes. You're going to have enough options that in Photoshop afterwards, you can select the right frames, and then I'll get into how you actually edit it. You just want to make sure that you have lots of options. So one last tip is always make sure that you get one frame with the lights of the car on and everything else dark, so that you can comp that into the final image once you've stacked up all the layers if you want to. You're not always going to want the lights in the frame, but sometimes you will, so make sure you get that. And now that you've got all of those, so you've got your base frame, which is the dark frame, you've got all the light painted shots, and you've got a frame with the headlights and the tail lights turned on. Once you've got that for every setup, you can either move on to the next setup, change the car angle, change the composition that you've got, and shoot a bunch of them. But when you're ready, you can now go back and put them all into Photoshop and start stacking them up, which is what I'm going to show you now.
Okay, so now we're back in Lightroom. We're going to go through the steps that I take when I'm editing these light painting composite photos. So in this case, we're going to just look at one. I'm going to show you every step, and then you can apply this process to any light painted image, and hopefully also in any editing software, in that it's not specific to Lightroom and Photoshop, although obviously that's what I'm going to show you here. So first of all, you want to go through all of your images and work out which images you're going to use for the light painting composite. So, and then what I've done is I've labeled them as being 5 stars, so I know which ones I'm actually going to port over to Photoshop. Then you're going to click down Control and select all the images that you want to use for your edit. And then you're going to right click on them, go up to Edit In, and then Open as Layers in Photoshop. And what that'll do is it will then open Photoshop if it's not already open, and it will start opening the images as separate layers in a new document. Now this can take a while if they're large files, or if your computer is not particularly powerful. So give it a minute and it will look like it's kind of loading, and then once it's done, you'll have all the images stacked up like this. So step 1 is make your selects. Step 2 is port them over to Photoshop as layers in the same document like this. Okay, once you've done that, a good step to do is to look at what's actually in each layer, and then label it so that when you've got multiple layers later on, you can always identify which one is which easily. So I do that now, I've already done that. And then the next step is to select all the layers by clicking on one, hitting Shift, and then clicking all of them. And then you want to go up to Edit, and then Auto Align Layers. Now this is done because even if you're shooting on a tripod, there can be little minor movements from the camera if you're pressing the shutter button, or if you accidentally knock it, or even if you've got it on the ground and you walk past it, sometimes that can be enough to just shift it just a little bit. So I tend to just use Auto, click OK, and then what that's going to do is it's going to work out exactly how to stack up the images exactly on top of each other, so that now when you are changing the images here, the actual subject is perfectly the same on each image. And as you can see, what it's created is a little bit of a gap around the edges where it's shifted the image slightly, and you can just crop that out later. So that's a really important step. So step number 3 is align all of your layers. So once you've done that and you've renamed your layers here, what you can do is you can set the order. And what you want to do is you want to take the darkest frame that you have, and hopefully you do have a dark frame. My one is actually this one here, which has got just the headlights and the tail lights turned on. So this is going to be my dark frame, my base frame. So I'm going to put that at the bottom just by dragging it down. And then what you can do is you turn on all the other layers by clicking these little eye icons here. And then you select all of the layers above the base layer and go to alter the blend mode here and go to lighten. And as you can see, what that does is any part of these images here, these 4 frames here, that is lighter than this base layer will show through. So effectively you're kind of stamping all of the images into one. Now what you can see here is that while that's lit up the car quite well, it's quite chaotic and it's not particularly pleasing. So what we're now going to do is we're going to mask out the areas that we don't want in the image. And also you can see the light trails coming across the top here from where the light actually was. And in this instance we're going to go for an image where you don't have those light trails in the image. We've also got one image in here which has got an alternate background with all these lights on in the background, and we're going to just turn that one off and the one above it, and you can now see that without the background lights the car kind of stands out a bit more. So we're going to do a few different versions of this photo, which is one of the really cool things about this method, is that once you've stacked up a whole bunch of images and you shot them in the same place, so the car's in the same place, the tripod's in the same place, and you haven't changed any of the settings, you just do lots of different types of exposures, you can then not only get different options for one image, but you can quite often get multiple images out of it. So the other thing to do is go down to one image at a time. So I think this is my favorite exposure of the car, this 45-degree pass where the light was kind of lighting up mostly the top of the car but also a bit of the side of the car. And so I want to mask out the parts of this image that I don't want. So I only want it to appear on the car. So one of the ways that you can do that is you can go up to select, the selection tool, the magic selection tool here, and then it gives you the option up here to go select subject. And what that's going to do is it's going to work out what it thinks the subject of the image is, which is obviously this car. It's normally a pretty good approximation of the subject, so it's pretty much picked that out perfectly. So what you can then do is you can create a layer mask by clicking this button down here, and you can see now that that has effectively removed all the lights from the or all the surrounding areas and just left us with this nice cutout of the car. So if we wanted to see what that looked like, you can just do disable layer mask and it'll bring it all back. And we actually want to enable this layer mask. Now in this instance I actually want to bring back some of the foreground here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the brush tool, which is just hitting B on the keyboard. I'm going to make the brush nice and big, and I'm going to lower the opacity down to 13, that'll be fine, and lower the flow down to about 50%. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint with white, so I'm just going to make sure that white is selected, and then I'm going to gently paint back in some of this light on the ground here, because I want the car to look like it is actually sat in this environment here. There we go. So now we've got a nice exposure of the car, and we've got a little bit of the foreground showing, which is what we wanted. So I can come back in and clean up these other details later. So then I'm going to see what this top pass does. So actually the top pass, which is just this, I've nailed it top pass because this is the place where the light was as it passed over. I'm going to use this in a different image, one where I'm just focused on this very top edge of the car, but I don't actually think it adds anything to this particular image. Possibly you get a little bit more detail on this front fender area, but actually I think it's quite a strong image without it, so I'm going to leave that one off. This is the alt background, so as you can see it's lighting up this background lights, and it's also giving us some nice exposure on the wheels, which I might use. And I've got alt background 2, which effectively is the same thing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a layer mask on this layer here, which I called ambient, and then I'm going to do Control I, which inverts the layer mask, which gets rid of everything, and then I'm going to paint back in where I want to show the light from this particular exposure. Now it's mostly on the wheels, so I'm going to take the opacity right all the way back up, photo 100. So now you can see where you're painting it in. So I like the exposure on the wheels, and I want a little bit more exposure on the carbon side fender here, and a little bit down here on the sill. But other than that, I don't actually want to show it on everything, so I'm then going to switch back to black and I'm going to paint out the areas where I don't want it. So I don't want these reflections here. I actually think it's a little much, so I'm going to dial this back just a touch in a second. So now that I've got this exposure of the wheels, I think it's a little bit too much. So what I'm going to do is lower the flow of the layout, and you can see it's now less prominent and suits the rest of the image. So you're just getting a little bit of detail there, maybe a touch more. There we go. So now what I've got pretty much the final image that I want in terms of the car. So what I'm now going to do is effectively now edit this as if it was a normal standard image. I'm going to do an entire separate video on my sort of general workflow for general editing, but in this particular one I'd be just clearing up the background and adding a few little extra pops, doing dodging and burning and pulling out the colours and so on. But here is the final edit for this particular image. I then went back and played around with the different options that I had, some of the different shots that I had, and I came up with this shot, which is just the over the top pass, and then everything else cleaned up to give this kind of minimalistic side profile of the car. And then finally I also came up with this shot, which included some frames where we added some smoke to the background just to give it some atmosphere. So hopefully that gives you an insight into how you can use light painting to get some really interesting looks and to light up images in darker scenarios. Obviously this doesn't work in daylight outside. You have to find either a dark environment or you have to wait until it gets dark to do this, and you can experiment with different types of lights, different angles that you pass the lights past the cars, and also whether or not you're going to show the light trails in the background. I'm going to put up a whole bunch of different examples now just so you can see all the different types of effects that you can get using light painting, and all of these shots were done using various different methods of light painting. If you got something from this, it'd be really cool if you could drop me a like and or drop me a comment if you've got any questions. It really does help, and I'll see you in the next one.